Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. You're joining the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center, and today we have a webinar, Creating Trauma-Informed Judicial Systems, Creating Safe Spaces for Tribal Youth. And my name is Anna Rangel Clough, and I serve as the Assistant Director here at the TA Center, and I am Muskogee Creek and Uchee. And we also have Courtney Yarholer joining, and I'll let him introduce himself really quickly.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today. And as we present this information and wherever you're joining from. So my name is Courtney Yarholer. I am a TA coordinator here with the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we're glad all of you are here with us today. We'll go ahead and move forward. We know some people may still be joining. And so we just want to do an opening exercise with you all, and we appreciate everybody that's here with us today. I see several of our grantees. I know, Courtney, if you want to do our
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. I always appreciate the opportunity to, not only present information and share information that we gather and we hear, but also to share opportunities so that we can come together in a like-minded way. And, as I was thinking about kind of where things have been and currently that I've been going through, is that I was reminded through teachings and values of many of our elder Indian people is that one of the values that we lean on when we're having a difficult time or there's problems or there's things on our mind, worries and concerns, is to always start at a place of, if we're feeling unbalanced, if you will, start at a place of gratefulness, of trying to find and recognize those things that you're grateful for. So I'd like to open up this morning or this afternoon, this webinar, by asking each of you to just take a few moments to think about something that you're grateful for. Think about something that you're grateful for. It might be a person, it might be somebody in your life, it might be something that you've recently, maybe you finished that assignment or that task, or you have the opportunity to do this work, or whatever it is. Maybe it's a young person, a child that smiled at you and it pushed you through. Would like to ask that maybe in the chat box, if you could help us out and type in your name, where you're calling in from, and at least one thing that you're grateful for. And as you're doing that, I'm looking at the list here, and we recognize several names. There's several that have been with us on previous webinars. We want to say hello and also welcome some new names, some new people. Great. We have Shauna Hill. Great. Thank you. From the Skokomis tribe, I thank you so much for joining us today. Tanya Covington from Albuquerque. Great. Thank you so much. And if you could go ahead and include maybe at least one thing that you're grateful for, I think that would help each and every one of us recognize our gratitudes and help ground us today as we begin to share information and opportunities. So we'll see a couple of things with this exercise. We'll see where we're all, how far stretched Indian country is and diverse it is, and where we're calling in from. But yet at the same time, we might see how similar we are in the things that we're grateful for. So again, I thank you for sharing sweet child smiles and teachings, the great work that we're doing, having healthy boys. Hello, Bridie. It's good to see your name. Thank you all for sharing. This is nice. This helps, for me, it helps ground, and so I hope it does for you too. Okay, so please continue to type in and to share, but in the respecting our time, I think I'm going to turn it over to our next person that we're going to hear from. Is going to take us into our next portion of the webinar. And we have some tech overview, or some housekeeping, if you will. So Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you very much, Nick. So Mr. Nicholas Birdshead, he's our technical person here on our side, as well as manages our Adobe platform. We sure appreciate the work that he does, as well as there's others on our team that are critical, as you well know, with the projects that you work on. So I want to start off by introducing who we are as a Technical Assistance Center. We are the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. We provide culturally based, trauma-informed training, support, and other technical assistance to all OJJDP funded tribal program grantees, as well as federally recognized tribes. OJJDP, if you're not familiar with that acronym, stands for the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. If you want to request technical assistance, there's a link there that you can request technical assistance from our TA Center. And you can also find out more about the services that we offer, the technical assistance we offer, and the trainings that we have available at our website, which is tribalyouthprogram.org. So please, when you get a chance, visit tribalyouthprogram.org. Now, the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center, among being one of the longest acronyms out there, we are housed at in the Indian Country Child Trauma Center, which is directed by Dr. Dolores Sibia Bigfoot. And we're also housed within the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center here in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. So you'll see the Indian Country Child Trauma Center logo, as well as the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance and OJJDP logos throughout the resources that we share. And but that's a little bit about who we are, where we're housed. And I'm going to ask Ms. Anna Clough to tell us a little bit more about what we do and who we work with directly concerning the grantees that are funded through OJJDP.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you all for sharing earlier. I know, like Courtney was saying, it's really neat for us to get on these webinars and see, you know, just the distance that everyone is joining from. So it's really nice to see a lot of our OJJDP grantees, and then also those of you who may not be a grantee currently, but maybe former or interested. We're glad that you're here. So currently we serve CTAS Purpose Area 8, Tribal Juvenile Healing to Wellness Courts, and Purpose Area 9, which are tribal youth programs. And with both of those, there's just a variety of things happening in different communities, and so we're really grateful that we're able to be of service to communities that are funded by OJJDP, and I know that there's many of you joining here today that have either a CTAS Purpose Area 8 or Purpose Area 9 award. So today our webinar objectives are to, one, discuss trauma, the factors that impact tribal youth, and look at the implications for you as service providers. We're going to talk about the 6 guiding principles of trauma-informed care and elements that have been designated to support a trauma-informed juvenile justice system. And we're going to be pulling from several national resources to discuss that. And then we're also going to engage in an interactive case study. And so we're really, you know, technology can be both our foe and our friend. We're hoping today that it's our friend because we'd like to do an interactive case study at the end of this webinar to go over some of the principles that we discussed today. And so we hope that you all enjoy that. We hope to provide a really good introduction to formulating a trauma-informed approach in your community and in your justice system. So with that, we're going to launch right into our material. And so as many of you know, youth in the justice system are particularly impacted by trauma. And there are many studies out there that have tried to gauge how many trauma may have been in the life of different youth, but most of the studies come out to about the 3/4 mark to even the 80% mark in youth having been victimized at some point or exposed to trauma before they ever enter into the juvenile justice system. And so youth that are court involved have a particularly high instance of a trauma history, and so that's why we're here today. We're talking about how to work with these youth, and we know that not all youth have been victimized or exposed to trauma in their lifetime, but a vast majority of youth that we work with have been, and so that's why it is so important for us to design and look at system development that is trauma-informed. And so with that, we wanted to do a quick poll. And so, Nick, if you could pull that poll over. So for those of you that are joining today, what do you know about trauma-informed care and juvenile justice? Do you have some knowledge, a lot of knowledge? Are you an expert? We'd love to know who's joining us today and what your experience is with trauma-informed care or a trauma-informed approach. I see a lot of people are responding, and some people have some knowledge, a lot of knowledge, about 31% of you, 60% some knowledge, no knowledge. That's great too, that's why we're here. This is a good introduction. And I see there are no experts in the room, and even Courtney and myself are not sitting here professing to be, having the expertise in the field. We're here today to have a conversation with you all about principles that scholarship and work in the field is indicating. These are some approaches that we can use to really support youth who are coming into the system. And I think you can pull that over. I see some people saying they're having trouble hearing. Can you all hear? I just want to make sure before we move forward if anyone's having issues. You guys can just type in the chat box. Still static. Okay, well, Courtney, I'm going to have you go ahead and move forward, and then we'll see if it's just something on one end or the other.
Okay, great. Let's see. Well, we will move forward, and I do notice that I had my microphone close to my collar, so it may have been rubbing. I don't know if that's the problem, but I'm going to lift that up so that doesn't happen. Okay, so we're going to move on into our presentation here. It looks like we're seeing better, so maybe it was my collar. All right. Good thing I didn't wear my 70s disco shirt with the extra large collars today. So, okay. Poor joke, I know. All right. So we're going to begin with a brief introduction and overview of trauma in Indian country. And as a broad overview of trauma, the impacts of trauma, and cumulative trauma. So when we look at trauma in Indian country, we look at it in many, there's been a lot of different studies, a lot of different writings, and growing understanding about the effects and the impacts of trauma across Indian country. So what we are doing here is we're recognizing these three different broad views of cumulative trauma. Cultural trauma, we recognize it as cultural trauma impacting things like policy and laws that impact generations, lifeways, languages, and traditions. We recognize how that cultural trauma layered on to the events, the historic events, such as disease, the forced relocation, a lot of the policies that we know of, the boarding school policies, the termination policies, assimilation policies, all that impact and all of that over generation, all of that trauma collectively, and then also how it impacts individual situations. So again, today we look at and we recognize the individual situations of poverty, violence, abuse, neglect, substance abuse, suicide, and I'm sure we can go on. And our next slide actually gives us a great visual in terms of how the impacts and the effects of trauma manifest in individuals, and also what we see within our families and our communities across Indian country. So when we have this idea of trauma, of cumulative trauma, and as we see the generation after generation and dealing with the unresolved grief and all of the things that come along with these traumatic events and experiences, we recognize that our individually as well as collectively certain communities and people and populations that experience these kind of things are more likely to experience daily trauma. And so again, we see how that manifests and the impacts of trauma manifests within our individuals, our families, and our communities. So this slide here really recognizes that you have trauma which can manifest into child abuse, neglect, learning disabilities, poverty, depression, suicide, mistrust, heightened high numbers of incarceration, domestic violence. We even see how it impacts physiologically with the immune system, and recognizing when maybe somebody's in poverty and maybe doesn't have clean water or some of the basic needs that we need as human beings, how that impacts us over a broad spectrum. So these are just some visuals here, again, offered to us from Dr. Bigfoot, but some really great visual to see some of the impacts of trauma over time. So we're talking about the justice system and the juvenile justice system. So why should we consider trauma when we're talking about the justice system? For several reasons. But we're going to start off with recognizing that trauma can impact the emotion, cognition, and memory. So when somebody is exposed to trauma, they are, one of the human reactions that happens is in physiological reactions, it takes us to a place of fight or flight reaction. Not necessarily the best, in the state of making the best decisions. And it can lead to dysregulations that lead to out-of-control behavior. So when we think about trauma and the impact of trauma, I always say that whenever an individual experiences a traumatic event, the first two things that are taken away from them, there's things that's taken away from them, things that happen to them during a trauma. And two things that are taken away is the sense of safety and the sense of choice. And when those two things are taken away, it can put us in a state of fight or flight. And so that is, puts us on this trajectory, and it has the potential to put us on that trajectory if the surroundings and the individuals that are interacting with an individual who's been through a traumatic experience are not sensitive to those needs. So it's important for us to learn about trauma-informed trauma care and how to begin to interact with those that have experienced various kinds of trauma. So that leads us to our next talking points of common reactions to traumatic stress. So again, we break it down into these 4 quadrants. Many of us are familiar with seeing and understanding life views through this medicine wheel type model, that there's the physical, the behavioral, the relational, the emotional, spiritual meaning the one that kind of binds it all. And it's really, you really can't have one without the other, and they're all very integral in the balance of our life ways. But we recognize here the common reactions to traumatic stress through physical and cognitive. We see that we have increased rapid heartbeat, sweating, blood pressure rises, dizziness, So you can see that there's a lot of different physical things that happen to us physically when somebody's experiencing traumatic stress. Behavioral, we look at the behavior of individuals. This traumatic stress can lead to people isolating themselves, from being quiet to being very aggressive and uncooperative. So it could lead to a lot of different things that could be misperceived. The behavior could be misperceived by whoever's working with them. And, you know, for instance, if a young person has experienced traumatic events from a trusting adult, then maybe authority figures may heighten this sense of trigger the trauma reactions and the traumatic stress, and their behavior could be to isolate themselves and pull themselves away, or they could become more aggressive. And so if a person of authority, maybe a teacher or a principal or somebody that's trying to care, we have to recognize that behaviors are coming stemming from somewhere. So it takes a little bit more investigation to find out why our young people are reacting the way that they are. In terms of the relational, you get more irritable interactions. It increases distrust. It becomes argumentative. Conflict in relationships or change in peer groups. So we see a lot of these kinds of things. And also, we also see impacting relationships, not only with others, but maybe the relationships they have of it says here, identity issues and spiritual issues. So, you know, we need to see that and recognize how it can impact the imbalance, can impact someone's relationship with their spiritual knowledge and their spiritual truth. So, and then we also have the quadrant of the emotional, where there's intense fear, helplessness, hopelessness, anger, anxiety, numb, rage, depression. So again, recognizing that these are very overwhelming emotions. And one thing that we recognize and we utilize is the theory of the cognitive behavioral health treatments, or CBT, which basically tells us when we see something, how we interpret what we see can impact how we feel about it. How we feel about it, that can impact what we do in our behavior. And so we recognize that there's that connection there between mind, body, and behavior. Now, over time, what we learn, and we learn from the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, or the ACEs study. Maybe many of you have heard of the ACEs study. What we learn, lasting effects of trauma, is that, that the more that a child is exposed to adverse experiences, the greater the likelihood of behavioral problems such as substance abuse, poor mental health, or chronic disease. And you know, there's more that we can pull, and more that they've found within the ACEs study, where we recognize that the more exposure to adverse experiences heightens and increases the likelihood of some very chilling things. We also know that those who've had adverse childhood experiences have changes in the structure and function of memory, learning, and emotions. So here we recognize that not only is it changing our emotional health, but it can also have physiological changes in development of the brain, which impacts our memory and our learning, and it can lead to other disabilities or other things that may impact a person's life negatively in the future. We also know that an early traumatic event can affect a child's ability to cope with future stressors, setbacks, leading to greater likelihood of negative coping mechanisms. So again, substance abuse, disordered eating, violence. And what we'll really learn here, and from this bullet point, is recognizing that the ability to cope is really what is suffered. And But with that, we also recognize as we're developing programs and taking steps to help our young people is that we recognize that our young people, those that have experienced trauma, really lack the ability to cope. And so the more that we can do to help prepare them to cope through change, that is when we'll start to see some impact. But again, we see that early traumatic events can have a negative impact on the ability to cope with change. So we're going to start talking about a little bit about the trends and the data. So I'm going to ask Anna to come in here and walk us through the next couple of slides.
Thank you, Courtney. So many of you that are joining us may already be working in a tribal community or part of a tribal community, and so you may have some firsthand knowledge of what the data is within your own community, but we know with nationwide data that's been provided in various studies that American Indian and Alaska Natives have higher rates of suicide, substance use, exposure to violence and neglect, and experience trauma at alarmingly high rates. And more specifically for tribal youth, suicide is the third leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 10 and 24, and the American Indian Alaska Native population has the highest rate of death by suicide. With substance abuse and, like we discussed, exposure to violence, I know that Dr. Bigfoot here on our staff regularly references the ACEs study, which indicates that there is a higher exposure to violence and neglect for American Indian children, and we see in national studies available to us through several national resources that substance use among American Indian youth is very high. And so when we look at how we address this in the juvenile justice system, taking all of those factors into account and really trying to work with youth with an understanding that there is a high likelihood that they've had a trauma occur in their life, and that in order to formulate case processes that are really going to help them and be effective, it's important for juvenile justice professionals to, one, have a knowledge and an understanding of the impact of trauma, and to have an understanding of the trauma-informed approach. And what we hope as a center is to share with you all that understanding and recognizing trauma or screening for that isn't labeling the youth. It's helping to support you as a service provider to inform the approach in which you're going to work with the youth. So this isn't about placing a label on the youth or putting them into a separate category and saying, well, they're traumatized and can't be helped. It's really about how do I formulate a case process as either an attorney, a judge, a caseworker, somebody working in the community that's involved in the court system, just to have an understanding of the baseline of what may have impacted the way that this youth behaves, the way that their family is responsive in the court setting, and how to effectively work with them as they experience the justice system in your community. And so this is really about changing the way that we approach youth and working with the understanding that there has to be accountability and that we want communities to be safe. But in order to do that and in order to effectively work with the youth, how are we doing that? And are we doing that with a full understanding and with a perspective that really is going to support helping them on a journey out of the justice system? So reducing recidivism, helping them work towards autonomy, and ultimately focusing on the youth's wellness and then community safety, community wellness. So trauma and juvenile justice. So this is an approach to engage people with histories of trauma and recognizing the presence of the trauma system, the role that is played in their lives, and changing and shifting our paradigm from what is wrong with you to one that asks what has happened to you. And I know personally, having worked as a prosecutor and working in juvenile court settings, a lot of times when you have a youth that's come into the court over and over again, you've just closed out one case and then you're several months later and you've opened a brand new case and it's the same youth and the same family and the same circumstances, and you're wondering, why does this keep happening? Why can this family not change? Like, do they not understand they're going to get in trouble again if they keep doing this. So, when we're doing that, is it really effective? What we're trying to do is shift it to what is happening, what has happened within this family, within this particular youth's life, and what can we do as a service provider to refer to effective services that really are going to hopefully reduce the chance of recidivism and help this youth on to a more full and well life. And so that's why we're here today. That's why we're having these conversations. And we know, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, but there are some guiding principles that we see that are effective. And so that's what we're going to move on to in our conversation now. So Courtney is going to share the guiding principles of trauma-informed care. Courtney, are you on?
Hello, sorry, I was on mute. Yes, thank you, Anna. A lot of work has gone into identifying principles, guiding principles of trauma-informed care. And we see that SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, really has a lot of great material that many researchers and social scientists have contributed to, and voices of community members to recognize and develop the guiding principles of trauma-informed care, which have been developing for years now. And we boil it down to these 6 guiding principles. And this is 6 guiding principles of trauma-informed care. And when we're delivering service and care for somebody that has experienced trauma, we want them first to feel a sense of safety. Because as I had mentioned earlier, the first thing that is taken away when somebody experiences a trauma is their sense of safety. They didn't choose to be in that situation or choose for that thing to happen to them. So helping create a sense of safety is number one on our guiding principles of trauma-informed care. And I'm not going to say that these are ranked in any order. They're just presented because there's 6 guiding principles, but safety happens to be the first one that we mentioned. Trustworthiness and transparency is another guiding principle that is critical to trauma-informed care. When you're helping somebody, especially within a system, within somebody that's experienced trauma, and imagine you're going through an agency or an organization or program to receive some kind of help. If the safety has been broken, they have a low sense of trust. So in trying to work to increase that trustworthiness and then also being transparent. And so letting them know what's going to happen in the process, letting them know why you're doing an intake, letting them know all the different components of the program. That way they have a better understanding of the program and how this program may help is our steps in that we could pull out of the guiding principles. So trustworthiness and transparency. Let's see, peer support and mutual self-help. So empowering that and recognizing that there are others that have experienced trauma, and your peers may be there to be supportive, as well as recognize that the individual has the strength within themselves to help themselves. And so when we can operate and deliver services in a way that it needs to, sorry, I was looking at something, recognize that an individual has the strength within them to help themselves. When our services can empower that self-help and empower that peer support, that's also a guiding principle of being trauma-informed care. We move on to the next step, or the next guiding principle of collaboration and mutuality, recognizing that as service providers, we're not necessarily doing something for people, but we're doing something with people. We're helping, we're collaborating with. And in collaboration, all of the responsibility and accountability is not only on the organization or the service provider, but also it's a share in a collaboration. It's a shared cooperative. And so operating in a way systematically where the individual that's experienced the trauma is a partner in a collaboration of their own healing. This is what we're striving for systematically. And we do that by supporting empowerment of voice and choice. Again, going back to the one thing that we mentioned earlier, in those two things that are taken away from you, sense of safety and then your sense of choice. Because when somebody experiences trauma, they didn't choose that trauma. It just happened to them. And so regaining and empowering through that choice and having their voice heard is very empowering. So again, guiding principle of trauma-informed care is voice and choice, empowerment through voice and choice. And of course, being culturally competent, we always look to the services and the service providers and the service being provided being culturally competent. And so that's recognizing the strengths of the individual, the strengths of the family and community, and working from their strengths. And if those strengths happen to be faith in cultural healings or cultural understandings, or even recognizing, understanding youth culture. You know, there are strengths within youth culture. And so again, looking at cultural competency in a broad spectrum, but also looking at it as in terms of where is this young person or the people that we're working with, where are they coming from? How do we support them within the context of their culture? So again, the 6 guiding principles of trauma-informed care are safety, trustworthiness, transparency, peer supports, collaboration, voice and choice, and cultural competency.
Thank you, Courtney.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about principles of trauma-informed care, there are several national centers that are dedicated to furthering the knowledge that we have on how to implement trauma-informed approaches within our system. We chose to share these from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, but when you're looking to develop a trauma-informed system, looking at trauma-informed policy and procedures, identification and screening of youth who have been traumatized, clinical assessment and intervention for trauma-impaired youth, trauma-informed programming and staff education, prevention and management of secondary traumatic stress, trauma-informed partnering with youth and families, trauma-informed cross-system collaboration, and trauma-informed approaches to address disparity and diversity. And so really what you see here that they shared from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network is that these are elements that go to developing a cross-system collaboration that really impacts how you're working with the youth in your community. And so it isn't just one part of your system that is going to be trauma-informed. It's really working together with all of the court and referral providers that provide services to your youth that are in your court system. So it's not just your judge and your prosecutor becoming trauma-informed. It really is working with your behavioral health, your police, other departments that are working with the youth that come into the juvenile justice system, and really working to have cross-collaboration on how you approach youth that are coming into the system and how you're working to identify trauma early on, and identify how you're going to screen and what kind of referral services that you're going to offer once you have identified a youth that maybe has a higher level of trauma and may require some more higher level referral services to support them. So when we talk about trauma-informed care, generally, I know Courtney has already walked us through the 6 principles, but if you want to jump back in here, Courtney, we can talk about what we're doing, why are we talking about this, and the transition that we're trying to discuss.
Thank you very much. And in our discussions amongst colleagues, I know Dr. Bigfoot has had a role in, as we were discussing trauma-informed care one day and kind of really breaking it down. And so we wrote it out as though trauma being the event or experience as to what happened, the informed component being the understanding, and the knowledge, and the safety. So we have that that understanding of safety and the knowledge, and we're understanding what happened, what event or what experience, what actually happened. And then the care, really referring to the behaviors, the policies, the surrounding the environment, things that we put in place to care for an individual. So we break it down in terms of trauma-informed care in this way. Dr. Bigfoot also a lot of times refers to our indigenous, our tribal ways of taking care of one another. Or what she's also used the term of being a relative. So when we think about that, we think about what our Indian people have always done. Whenever all of our tribes are diverse. However, one thing that we've always done is we've always taken care of one another. We've always had ways to take care of one another, to support one another, to support one another through transitions. It could be through coming of age ceremonies. It could be through, when celebration of ceremonies of feasts, or things to recognize birth or growth or change of the seasons. There's a number of different protocols and things that are in place within our indigenous communities traditionally that support one another through transition. And that's really what trauma-informed care is learning these principles that support a provider, a service provider, a system, and helping somebody transition from what was before to what is now. So, and that can include things like recognizing the memories and recognizing the triggers that trigger these memories, this traumatic experience. We help them define that trauma, so that way the trauma doesn't define us or define the person. And then we learn healthy self-care skills. We try to teach that, healthy self-care skills. With this, in this transition, healthy transition, also does it helps reveal people to themselves. And again, building trust and support youth and resiliency. But I'm going to go back to that helping reveal to ourselves who we are. It's really revealing that resilience and that inner strength that is within each and every one of us. So that's the process and the practices that we can try to teach and share within trauma-informed care that really support these healthy transitions. Trauma-informed care, again, it's important to be aware that many people who appear before you remain in harmful environments and relationships, even while they participate in treatment court programs. And so that is a direct quote. But we also recognize that although somebody may be coming into their appointments or be working a program, they may still be in those harmful environments and those relationships. So that's another added layer to be considered while we're working with an individual, working with a family. It helps us realize, recognize the challenges, and think about how we can begin to work systematically to improve the lives of individuals. So, but with that, it also helps us recognizing that systems change. It takes time, as well as a lot of training and effort. So what is a trauma-informed care helping system? You have these slides, and we'll be happy to send them to you. I'm looking at the time, and I want to move it along a little bit. But on the core, trauma-informed care helping system is a strength-based process, emphasizes understanding and responsiveness to the impact of trauma on the individuals and communities, highlights the importance of physical, psychological, and emotional safety for providers as well as the survivors of the trauma. Now that is an important point that we need to not overlook, is the safety for providers. So looking at self-care for providers, the service providers, because when our service providers burn out, we're not helpful to anybody else. And so we have to learn how to take care of ourselves as well. The trauma-informed care system, it helps foster a sense of control, empowerment, voice and choice. It recognizes cultural competency, opportunities for continued training and development, and it highlights the resilience that makes the healing possible. Key assumptions for the trauma-informed care. Again, we recognize this through a lot of different materials that we see. But the 4 R's of trauma-informed care is that we want to realize, we want to recognize, we want to respond, and we want to resist re-traumatization. So when a program or an organization is trauma-informed care, they will do all of these things. They will realize the widespread impact of trauma and understand the potential path for recovery, recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma, and respond fully integrated knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. So we're not only talking about practices, but now we're talking about policies, procedures, and systematic change. And then also as an organization, actively seek to resist re-traumatization. Anna, I think you're going to talk about this slide. Yes.
Yes, thank you. And I wanted to jump back to a point that you made about being aware that the youth that are coming into your system who have experienced trauma in their life, may remain in the same families and the environments that they were in before that caused the trauma. And so I think that's, when we talk about how are we really going to help these youth and impact them and work in their lives as a service provider, that's really what we're charged with as part of the justice system. If you're an officer of the court or if you're a judge or some other provider that works with court-involved youth, it's really about, maybe their circumstances at home haven't changed, but when they're working with you as a provider, what are you doing to support them in their journey, in their individual journey? And then how as a community are you supporting that family who, may just be stuck in a cycle of violence or other just, really highly impacting trauma in the life of that family. And so when we look at our system and how we can change it, we wanted to focus on these 3 broad areas. And so what are you doing to train the professionals that work with your youth? What are you doing as part of your policy and practice? So in those policies that you have and those procedures that you have, are you acknowledging trauma-informed care? And then in the space and place, and that's really about the environmental factors and then physiologically how you're engaging with these youth. How are you engaging with them? Are you increasing that level of safety, protection, trustworthiness, and transparency for these youth? Or are you really just continuing to re-traumatize them? And so as a provider, looking at these 3 broad areas and how you want to change your system to really approach these youth in an effective way. So when we're talking about training, looking at your mental health and behavioral health staff, many of these people may already have trauma-informed care training, but those individuals that you partner with, are they knowledgeable about tribal communities? Do they understand the higher levels of violence, suicide, all the things that we talked about earlier? Are those things that are that they've been trained to understand? Because I know not every community has the benefit of working with a provider who really understands how to work with tribal populations. And so if you do have that, that's really great. If you don't, are you going to provide training for your partners that are serving your youth? Are you working to provide training opportunities for your probation, your police, those monitoring agencies that work with you? And are you really doing cross-system collaboration? So are you reaching out to your behavioral health or your health services to partner with your justice system so that you create effective referral processes? And then training is ongoing. So, going to one training is great, but really looking at a training plan for your team and ensuring that everybody has access to that. Because I know in some communities, you may wear many hats, you don't have time to do a lot of training, you don't have time to be away from the office, but it's important to take that time. And even like today, this is an hour that you've gone away from the work that you have on your desk, and so we're really glad that we're here and we're able to connect with you, but looking for training, regularly looking for training opportunities. There are many free training opportunities. There's some that are not, but making the time to go to those and really increasing your personal knowledge and the knowledge of the team members that you have. When you're focusing on trauma training, it's learning about youth and the impact of trauma on them developmentally, looking at common trauma triggers, and does your team understand that? looking at safety planning, and so de-escalating when a situation isn't going well, or if you have a youth that's highly reactive, looking at how to de-escalate the situation, focusing on skills and interviewing processes for your youth. So are the people who are talking to your youth in your justice system, do they have some skills in how they interview and how they speak to youth? And then preventing the vicarious trauma. So is everyone in your staff really working to not re-traumatize this youth? When we look at policy and practice, it's really looking at those hardline policies that you use in your system. So I know obviously you look at your own code and things like that. Usually there's some kind of policies and procedures for how you engage with youth. If you don't have those, maybe that's something that you start working on. With your judges, some people have in-house judges. Some people partner with local judicial staff that come in and contract with the community. And so are we educating those judges on the historical impact of trauma in your specific community? Do you have trauma-informed care principles readily available for them to review? And if you are a judge, are you taking the time to become informed and to integrate those principles in how you engage with youth that come in your system? The American Bar Association actually adopted a trauma-informed care policy and are really promoting that. It's your tribal bar association focused on trauma-informed care in your judicial system, and can you make that a part of your bar association rules or teachings or certifications? And I'm looking at the practice guidelines that attorneys use when they come into your court system. As well, looking at your leadership, so looking at your tribal leadership and your system supports, and really carrying an initiative forward. And we're really happy we're able to provide you with a download in the box. And there's a checklist of trauma-informed care activities on how to get started, and a way to look at your team and your system and how you're working right now, just to kind of get an introduction for yourself, a self-assessment of where you're at in a trauma-informed approach. So trauma-informed space and place. So this is your environment and how you're working with your youth, and supporting youth when they come into your system to assist with how they react when they're in the court system and how your team is going to react when you see this. And so I know Courtney shared earlier about fight or flight, and we know that when you come into the justice system, the research is not responsive, and so that might be a coping mechanism for them. Do you understand why youth are reacting the way they do, and then considering the developmental aspects also. And so what we want to do is look at how do they cope, what are they doing to survive, focusing on resiliency, because we know that youth are highly resilient, and making sure that our policies and procedures will support who they are as individuals and working to increase the effectiveness of how we're approaching them. So with that, we are going to move to an interactive case study. And Courtney, do you want to share a little bit about what we're doing and how we're going to do it?
Yes. So we're going to do an interactive case study, and we're going to encourage everybody to provide feedback. We're going to read a little bit. We have some scenarios that we're going to read, we're going to review, and then we're going to reflect back on some of the things that we covered on today's presentation. We're going to reflect back on the 6 principles of trauma-informed care. And so with all of that, we're going to ask that each and every one of you provide feedback, participate. We have some open-answered questions. We also have some that are more survey, multiple-choice questions. But what we really hope to do is redefine what we learned, because it's one thing to hear information and get it, just information through a presentation, but we hope that this helps reinforce what we're learning, and it gives us an opportunity to practice a little bit of what we were talking about. So with that, Anna, I will turn it over to you to introduce case study number 1.
Thank you. And yes, we are all connected virtually, and so if we were all in the same place in real life in a workshop, we'd be able to probably raise our hands or speak out loud, but your lines still are muted. And so what we're going to do is we'll bring up the answer pod and you can give your answer, and then we'll be using the chat box. So if you have feedback about a particular question or the scenario, feel free to enter that into the chat box, and then we'll be referring back and forth between the chat box and the answers that you give in response to our first case study. So these are not real people. This is not a real fact scenario. It is based loosely on fact, and so we just wanted to put that out up front. This is not a real person. So Jack is a 14-year-old tribal youth. He was issued a citation at the local school for truancy and has been expelled for too many absences and disruptive behavior. Jack's grandmother currently has guardianship of Jack. Jack's mother lives across town with her boyfriend. The boyfriend has a felony conviction for domestic violence. Jack has seen bruises on his mom, but fortunately he has never been present during any violent attacks. Jack rarely visits his mother's home, but does see her on occasion when she visits grandmother for money or to have an occasional meal. Jack's mother loves him very much, but has been unable to regain custody of Jack. Jack's grandmother has been struggling to help Jack get situated at school, and she is worried he will get a warrant for not showing up to court. Grandmother's car wouldn't start last week, and she won't get a check until the 1st of next month and cannot afford any repairs at this time. So I want to give you guys some time just to look back over that. I know for myself this is a very familiar fact pattern, having worked with many youth in the court system, and then having worked with many of your communities now and understanding of various issues that can come up for different youth. And so just as a reminder, Jack is a youth. He's received a citation. He lives with grandmother. He sees his mother, visits with her, but he doesn't see her often. Mother doesn't live there. She doesn't have custody of Jack, and grandmother is struggling. So it looks like she's taking care of him, but she's struggling. She's concerned about his court date, and it looks like she's concerned about money as well and a vehicle. So our first question is, do you recognize the possible trauma that is present in Jack's life? And we're going to pull over the poll here, and you can type in your answer. So do you recognize the possible trauma that is present in Jack's life? List any trauma or risk factors that you recall. And you can type your answer in. And we talked about trauma at the start of the webinar. So when we think about Jack's situation, what are some things that are happening in Jack's life? And you know that Jack is also an American Indian youth. So I'm seeing some of you are typing in some answers here. We've got separation from mom, abusive boyfriend, mom is close but not present, lack of resources. These are really good answers. Risk factors, ability to cope, survival strategies. And for me, I see Jack's mom's boyfriend. There's some risk factors there related to family violence. I see someone has typed in neglect, family violence. No father figure. That's very intuitive. No father figure. Instruction into cultural ceremony of Sundance as a training from boy to man. As such, his behavior will get worse. That is not the woman's role to instruct the boy. So we're looking definitely at our culture factors. Lack of control over his environment. So that lack of safety, that lack of ability to control what's happening in his life. Delinquency. He's been removed from his mother's home, possible witness of domestic violence, mother is not acting in the role of the parent, financial accommodation problems. So these are all really, really good answers. And these are the kinds of risk factors and trauma that could be present in Jack's life.
Right.
Feeling of inability to protect his mom. You guys are really good. You guys are drawing some really good
Right.
conclusions that even, Courtney and I didn't come up with when we were talking about this scenario. So let's move on. We can close that poll out. I want to go to the chat box for just a little bit, so you can pull that. So just a quick question: Does this scenario, is this a set of facts that you think are familiar for many of the youth that you may come across that come into the justice system? And like we said before, not all tribal youth are exposed to trauma, but Courtney and I both felt like this scenario was not far out of range for many youth that we've come into contact with, and we tried to come up with a realistic scenario. So I see a couple of people might be about to chat. We're going to move on to our next question, but I just want you to kind of reflect on the fact that this scenario is a very familiar scenario. So our next question, we're still talking about Jack, and so you are a newly appointed diversion program coordinator. You have the opportunity to interview Jack. So like many of us as service providers, we have the opportunity to work with the youth that are coming in, do some initial interviews or screenings or intake. So his grandma has forgotten to bring his school records. She doesn't have any copies of Jack's identification forms, no birth certificate, no ID cards. You're frustrated. You want to choose your reaction. So trauma-informed approach, choose your reaction. Is it A, you're lucky, your grandmother is so understanding, you shouldn't be missing so much school? Do you walk to school? I walked to school every day growing up. It was never a problem for me. Do you go to B, you offer grandmother and Jack a drink, show them to the waiting room. You ask Jack if he would like to review some forms and make sure his information is correct. You ask a few questions about his class schedule. You write out a list of the documents grandmother will need at your next visit. You call Tribal Social Services to see if they can send over copies of Jack's identification. Or do you do C? You ask to speak to Jack alone and have his grandmother wait in the waiting room. You ask Jack if he feels safe in his home, and you offer to take him to social services for help if anything is happening at home that he wants to talk about. So you choose. How do you respond in this situation? And we can't, this is anonymous, we can't see who chooses what.
Anna, there's while you were reading that and we were preparing for this question, there was a comment and that was put in the chat box I thought was something worth mentioning. Mr. Lawrence Swally said, I have rarely seen a juvenile judge inquire about the role and responsibility of the fathers. All of the burden is on the women. So, unfortunately, I think that's one of the things that we often see as well. So looking at these different roles, cultural roles, understandings. So again, possibly we're seeing a need for more training around cultural competency and, there's other opportunities there. So.
Well, and I think that's a really good point too. Is when we talk about what a guiding principle is or what these national recommendations are, taking those, but also the perspective of what matters in your community, and like you're talking about rites of passage that are specific to a certain tribal community. We're not saying that you must adopt these principles and these principles only. We're saying in light of your specific situation, how can you integrate these guiding principles as part of the way that you work with your youth? And so I think very thankful he shared that. So in response to this question, I think a lot of you chose what we tried to make as the most trauma-informed answer, and that was one, helping grandmother and Jack become accommodated to the court, working with Jack, giving him that sense of safety and transparency and what's about to happen, so going over his forms with him. So the second answer is what most people chose. And then some of you chose the third answer, which was asking to talk to Jack alone and helping him to feel safe. And that's what we wanted to do here, is talk about, answer B and C are both correct, because really it's about focusing on Jack and what his needs are. maybe B is a little bit more trauma-informed, but I think C is just as right as B. So really it's about, what are we not going to say? So we're not going to make Jack and Grandma feel worse when they walk into the doors of the courtroom. What we're trying to do is help the situation. And so I think both B and C are correct. And so thank you guys that responded to that. So we'll move on to our next question, Courtney.
Okay, setting 2, the adjudication hearing. You are a newly appointed judge. There are policies and procedures for juvenile hearings, which include the bailiff and clerk openly calling the court docket. Many families gather in a small lobby and others wait on the sides in front of the building. The walls are thin and the windows do not have coverings. You usually ask families to wait until they are all called to come into the courtroom, but sometimes you cannot. You cannot tell who's related to the client being called for a hearing. So your clerk prepares all your files for you a day ahead of the hearing, and you try to review the charges and dispositions for each case before the court date. There's a small conference room and chambers available to you. Youth are usually put into a separate docket than adults, but you have had a lot more cases lately, so both adults and juveniles are present on your court dates for the next few months. What things can you do to create a sense of safety and transparency in your courtroom? You do not have a large budget. So again, those are, that's the scenario, those are the questions, and these are recognizing some of the limitations, the practical limitations I think that we see. You do not have a large budget, but what are some things that you can do to create a sense of safety and transparency in your courtroom? So again, just answer the question. So what comes to mind here? You can use the pod there to type in your answers. Let's see, we have somebody that says honor traditions. So now we're getting into more this scenario again as real practical applications. What are some things that we can do to create a sense of safety and transparency in your courtroom? You can ask that juveniles and adults be on a separate docket. Okay. Right. When we're talking about, when somebody said honor traditions, wondering what they could tell us a little bit more about expand on that in terms of honoring traditions. I would appreciate that. So you designate a waiting area that does not put individuals close to each other that may have a history. I think that's always a good step there, something to consider. I would address both dockets in a single hearing that allows the juveniles to understand the expectations of parents and consequences of their actions. Protect confidentiality by making sure that only family or guardians are in the courtroom during the juvenile's hearing. So again, I think in terms of wanting to be trauma informed, of course, these are really great thoughts and things that we would like to do. But again, recognizing that in many of our tribal communities, sometimes they're very small, and it's hard to know who's related to who. So when we're talking about the confidentiality piece, those are things that we have to consider, recognize that things may be shared.
I just want to.
Yes.
Oh, I was just going to say I like what Vivian shared in the chat box about only using initials on the docket, and then I did see about calling the docket in alphabetical order so families aren't worried they will miss their hearing. And so, creating that sense of safety. And so all of the things that people are suggesting are things that don't cost anything. And so I think the point we were trying to make here is, it doesn't take a big budget to alter the approach of how you're serving youth. Really, it's about what are you doing to create that sense of trustworthiness and transparency and safety for the families that are coming into the court system. And so none of these are things that cost anything. They're free. You know, the way you engage with people and the way that you set up your dockets, the way you call them, the way you bring the youth into the courtroom, all of these things don't cost anything. And so that's really what we were trying to get at with this particular question. You can pull that back over, Nick. And we just wanted to point that out. So we're talking about how we work with the youth, looking at, you know, this is a large courtroom environment versus, you know, is there a conference room or another place that you can, you know, conduct your hearings, obviously with officers or court clerks present, you know, accommodating youth in a smaller space that doesn't create that sense of fear or just that kind of stark, cold environment of a normal courtroom. And so there's different ways that you can work with the youth so that you decrease that level of anxiety and increase, you know, that sense of closeness and trustworthiness of the service providers that are working with the youth. So SAMHSA and a couple of other national centers recommend that if you're using a bench, having clients come closer to the bench and having discussions with private details in a closer range. When you're going to talk with counsel, openly letting those that are standing in the room with you understand we need to discuss something that's private and you're going to resume a hearing after the discussion. And then scheduling your court docket. So just like somebody recommended in their answer, what are you doing to reduce client anxiety? So providing clients with a set time for their appearance and sticking to that. I know that's really hard when you have like a full docket for that day or you just have a lot of things on your schedule. But what are you doing to increase a sense of safety, and what are you doing to reduce that anxiety level of people coming into the court? Because I know as an attorney, there's always that kind of stress level that's around you when you're about to have a hearing or you're about to talk about something that's, you know, a high conflict situation or just something that's unpleasant. You know, you just kind of get that sense of negativity around you. And, you know, what are you doing to reduce that level of anxiety for everybody, not just for the youth that are coming in, but for your staff and for everybody else? How can you make it be a more comforting environment that's really there to be a helping environment and not so much of that accusatory environment?
Mm-hmm.
So setting 3. So we are still talking about Jack. And I know we only have we have about 15 minutes left, so we're going to try to quickly move through this. So you have an initial hearing with Jack. You decide to meet in chambers, just like we talked about, meeting in a closer environment. It's much more quiet and relaxed. You learn that he has not been able to get to school because his grandmother's car is not reliable. As well, some of the kids have been making fun of his clothes and worn out shoes. Jack tells you that his grandmother can't afford a car repair. She only gets paid once a month, and he just doesn't want to be around some of the kids at school. So these seem like really normal reasons for a kid just not to want to be at school. You decide to refer Jack to the diversion program and recommend 6 months of probation. You ask him if he is agreeable to 6 months of probation. You also contact social services to see if there's any financial support that can assist with his grandmother's vehicle. You ask Jack if there's anything else going on that's keeping him from doing his schoolwork or attending his classes besides what he's already shared. You ask Jack what he would like to do when he gets older and if he likes to work indoors or outdoors, if he prefers art or sports. Jack tells you he likes the outdoors and wishes that he could go camping sometime. There are many local campgrounds in the area, but no one has ever taken him on a camping trip. You know an elder that regularly goes scouting for bow-making materials. You ask Jack if he would like to go on a trip to find supplies. What guiding trauma-informed care principles are exercised in your conversation with Jack? So if this was your conversation with Jack, what have you done in that conversation that's trauma-informed? So when we look at those principles, safety, trustworthiness, transparency, peer support, mutual self-help, collaboration, and mutuality, when we look at that conversation, is there empowerment, is there voice, is there choice? What's been done there? Why, you know, what can you see that's trauma-informed? And is that the way that you approach the youth in your community when they come before you, either as an intake person, as a court personnel, as a youth program service provider? Is this the way that you engage your youth? So we're seeing support, empowerment, voice choice, culturally competent. You gave him a choice. And we recognize that not all the resources that are mentioned in this back scenario are available in every community. But when it's possible, that's the reason we talked about cross-system collaboration. So do your court staff, are they aware of what resources are available in your community? And if you're not, have you done a community assessment to look at, one, what's not only available in your community that can support the youth and the families, but are there other local or county partnerships that you can develop that have resources or other things that might be able to help in situations where you see some limitations for these families? So I see collaboration and mutuality, culturally competent, empowerment, voice and choice. See, invite him to Sweat Lodge along with family for cultural orientation, re-education, re-acculturation. There are local agencies that have resources to include the tribe for financial support.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. We can go ahead and close that. We'll move on to our last two settings. Courtney, you can go over those.
Okay, youth diversion program. You are the youth diversion coordinator, and Jack has been referred to your after-school tutoring. So now we are on the other side of the system, and after-school tutoring and activity program. You are excited to meet him and learn about his family. Jack shows up late the first day and doesn't want to join the group conversation. So you decide to A, reprimand him in front of the group. Respect is highly valued in the community, and youth must respect all adults at all times. Uh-oh. We're still connected? Okay. Sorry, my screen went black there for a second.
Oh.
Or B, you ask him to stay after the program, but don't tell him why. But you let him know you will discuss some things with him later, and when you get a chance to talk, you encourage him to participate because it will help him to get to know other students. Or C, you call Jack and his grandmother at the end of the day and ask if you can visit with them the next day at their home. You want to talk about all the exciting things that are there to do in the after-school program, and you want to make sure that Jack has everything he needs so that he can succeed in the tutoring program. So when we answer this polling question, we like to ask that consider what guiding trauma-informed care principles are in your decision, and and also, okay. So it looks like the majority of, or 100% so far, of the answers that have come in are for selection C. Call Jack and his grandmother at the end of the day and ask if you can visit with them the next day at their home. You want to talk about all the exciting things that there are to do in the after-school program, and want to make sure Jack has everything he needs to succeed in the tutoring program. Great. We also have an answer in asking him to stay after the program. You don't tell him why. That you want to, and you let him know that you will discuss things later with him. And it looks like a lot of people chose, again, there's answers that we feel are a little bit more trauma-informed, practice more trauma-informed approaches than others. And I think we can all agree that reprimanding him and demanding respect is not one of those. And so I'm going to take that as a good sign that some of what we've shared has been understood and delivered in a good way. So,
right.
Okay.
There was also a comment in the chat. Also asked Jack if he would be willing to have a mediation with the kids at school who are making fun of him as a re-entry mechanism. And I know that's one area that we've been focusing on as a TA center has been the restorative justice approaches and how those can be utilized in both the school setting and the court setting. And so we do have some resources here at the center to support that approach. If that's something that you're wanting to do in your tribal community or implement, We do have resources available here through the TA Center, and Erin Thinelk, who's on this webinar as one of our staffers, and we're happy to connect you with her as far as training and resources. So, like we were talking about, we developed a non factual scenario, but when you look at some of these things that happen, it's not far off or far-fetched from what we see happening in schools and in our communities. And so really glad that you brought that up.
Great. So along those same lines, there was a comment about peacemaking circles. So again, looking at the peacemaking, looking at those approaches of mediation and getting people together to discuss and come to a solution. So we can move on from this poll.
Okay. So you can read the next question, Courtney.
Okay, so you are the Youth Diversion Coordinator, and Jack has been referred to your after-school tutoring activity program. Wait. I was thinking that was a different one. Okay, so Jack has been showing up to the after-school program for about 6 weeks now, and he seems to be making friends and making some progress. Some of the other participants live in the same housing complex as Jack, and one of those students lets you know that she saw Jack smoking pot outside the complex and has seen him in an alley with a beer can on several occasions. So you trust that the disclosure is true. So you decide to, A, do nothing. You haven't seen him do anything, and honestly, it's not really a problem since he's participating in the program and seems to be making progress. B, you implement mandatory drug testing for all the youth participants. You want to catch all the kids that are doing drugs anyways, and you decide it's the best way to keep all the kids safe and keep bad influences out of the program. Or C, you wait to talk to Jack until you visit with a substance abuse counselor at your tribe. You want to make sure that you don't say anything that will set Jack behind in the program. So utilizing the trauma-informed care guiding principles, what do you do? A, B, or C? Safety, trustworthiness, transparency, peer support, mutual health, self-help, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice choice, cultural competency. It looks like we get most people are selecting option C. You wait to talk to Jack until you visit with a substance use counselor at the tribe. You want to make sure that you don't say anything that will set Jack behind in the program. So in terms of an individual, I think that's a great option because we're there designing programs, and this program is there to support Jack and his success and other youth and other kids in the program. So we don't want to punish, trying to move away from that punish or reprimand, but more of that healing and opportunity to identify and help those in need. And so if there is a concern, and if substance abuse or whatever the issue is beyond your capacity, it is a good idea to call in somebody that might be have more knowledge, expertise, or access to resources than you do. So, Anna, is there anything that you'd like to add to this?
I just wanted to add that, when we gave those answers, it's looking at, one is you're working with all of the youth, and so it's like, when a youth discloses something to you, respecting that, and then also being able to continue to work with Jack or the youth that you're working with in spite of, the limitations or the barriers or the struggles that they may be going through. So it isn't about, we can identify when a problem comes up that might inhibit case progress if they're involved in the court system, but really, like I've heard on other webinars talking about, we're not trying to catch these kids, we're trying to help them. And so even when we see that maybe they've struggled and they're not following, a court order or something else that's come up, like what are we doing to intervene and how are we going to best help them moving forward?
All right. Okay. We can move, in the interest of time, let's move on to the next Okay, Anna?
So what portions of Jack's story resonate with your prior experiences? So as a service provider, is there anything in this case scenario that you see, that you've seen working in your own profession and what work that you're doing right now? Are there any facts in this scenario that resonate with you or that you see occurring in youth that you've worked with? So I know for myself, like I shared earlier, just a story that I've shared at a couple of trainings is I had one youth that was particularly, just had a lot of things that were not going well for him, and so he'd been in the court system, and we tried to do a lot of different things to help him along, but he struggled because he didn't have that stability in his family. He had one parent in prison. He was being raised by another family member. And so when you see a situation like that as an attorney or as a judge, you see that there's that lack of stability, that what we're trying to do is, is the court the safe place that these youth know that there's somebody there that is understanding and wants to help them and wants to try to find a way for them to succeed. Because that's really what it's about is what are we doing to help this youth be successful in their life. And so I know for some youth, they may come through it and you've been able to do something that, impacts them and helps change the trajectory of their life. And then for some youth, like I know I checked in on a youth that had been in a court system that I worked in, and it ended up that he was actually an adult in prison. And, that actually broke my heart because it was like, did we do anything to help and intervene at an earlier point in his life, or the decisions that he continued to make put him on a path where he ended up in prison. And so, I think it's just good for us to look at what are we doing and how are we doing it, is it working, and what can we do to do our jobs better. And so the second question I posed was kind of my own reflection on having worked with some youth. So what do you do if you find out 2 years later, so when Jack is 16, you find out that he was charged with burglary or drug possession? So what do you do if you've tried to intervene and then 2 years later you find out that he's still making the choices that he's making? And just as a response from the group, what do you do when you find out that someone is continuing on that trajectory? And you can use the chat box if you have a response for that. And I know I shared with Courtney prior to the webinar that you continue to help is my response.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The decision may not be the one that you want him to make. Obviously, it's he may continue to be court involved, but that your job as a provider is to continue to, like we said, understand the circumstances that Jack is in may not have changed. And so we continue to support the youth. So even if they continue to make these choices, our response as a system is to continue to provide services for the youth, to continue to try to be effective, and to implement interventions and other things within their life that can be supportive. Courtney, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I'm looking at our time, and so I don't want to take it too much deeper. I know that we've covered a lot, and just recognizing that, yeah, the story is not a true story, but yet it resonates with a lot of experiences that many of us have seen. I want to recognize one of the comments down here that our current systems do not address the spiritual foundation or the lack thereof, and that those that have taken them up on their cultural approaches and instruction are much better off than those that hadn't. And so again, looking at that, the cultural competency aspect and recognizing the strength of the community and the culture. So again, thank you for sharing that.
So thank you, and I didn't realize we were all the way at the end of our time. It goes so fast. So when you look at your policies and procedures and the way that you're approaching your youth, just as self-reflection, we wanted to wrap up and leave you with what changes can you make in your own system, and do the policies and procedures in your own tribal system reflect trauma-informed principles. And the download that we talked about earlier, the trauma-informed checklist, is down there at the bottom. That's a great start. So we looked at some national tools that were available, and we tried to condense those down in this worksheet for your team. So make sure and download that, take that, and go over it with your team or just individually. Any partners that you want to connect with, and review where you're at as a system. And then, like we shared before, there's many ways that you can implement trauma-informed care throughout your system, both in the approach and then in the hard policies and hard copies of policies and procedures that you use. And just to encourage you to engage with your community and engage with your partners in this, because a true initiative is going to take cross-system collaboration. So what's available in your community, and then to utilize us as a TA provider. We're here, and we're glad to provide additional training or assistance if you're looking at a trauma-informed approach in your own community. So we're available here as a technical assistance center to support you in that. So we just have a couple minutes. I know we're about over time, but we will keep the Q&A open because we're here. We do have a survey that we would love if you have to log off, if you could take that. We like your feedback. I appreciate the notes about the sound. We're sorry about that, but we will make this webinar available in an archive version. It'll be available on our website. There will be a chat and a transcript with that, so you'll be able to see the captions if you missed any portion of the webinar. So if you had any connectivity issues, apologies on our part. If there was any kind of internet issues, that may have affected your sound. And so if you want an archive version of this, you can check out our website. It'll be updated at a later date, and you'll also get a link in the thank you for the Adobe video link pretty quickly after the webinar. So questions, comments?
A quick reminder, again, please do the survey, and to access that, in the lower left-hand corner, there's a pod that says Webinar Survey. You can just highlight the TICJS survey, and then select the where it says Browse To. Select that, and it'll take you to an online survey of the webinar, and we do appreciate your feedback. So I just wanted to mention that. And as Anna said, we will stay on for Q&A. If you have any other further questions or discussion, we'll be happy to continue that.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you all for joining today. We're really happy that we were able to share with you, and thankful for all of you and the work that you're doing in your communities, and appreciate you spending part of your day with us. We are here at the TA Center available to you for support. Both Courtney and my information are in the presenter contact information. And then feel free, you can connect in the chat box still. We'll keep that open while we leave that survey link up for you. And then the Q&A box is open. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate all of you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you do and the continued work that you're going to do and living out your passions. We know it is benefiting the lives of our young people and families, and your work does not go unnoticed.